All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Donadio. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Association of Counties, and I again want to welcome you to the first in the association's free video conferences. This one, Climate Change in New Jersey, which will showcase and highlight NJDEP initiatives and the various steps that they're taking to address climate change in the state of New Jersey. Before we get started, we have a really terrific panel put together to you today, and we're grateful for DEP for again doing this. Just a couple of housekeeping issues that we want to take care of. The first is that this program has been approved for continuing education credits in CMFO, CCFO, CPWM, QPA, and RMC. So if you'd like to earn 1 hour in credit in each of those disciplines, please make sure to let us know. And Lauren Wisman from our office will make sure to provide you with the certificates once the program is over. If you have any questions, we're going to make sure to answer them if we can at the end of the webinar. But please put them in the Q&A and not the chat box if you can. The chat box is reserved for if the panelists or Angela Wolf needs to communicate with us. And I just want to thank Angela again for managing all of the technology so I don't have to, because it would be a disaster. I say this all the time, and she does a fantastic job at doing this. So thank you, Angela. I also want to thank, before I introduce the panelists, all of our friends at DEP, Kerry, Rebecca, Emily, and Thomas. I think at least 3 of you are here today, and just thank you for all of your support. And if I can, Kerry, just again, if you don't mind, I just want to wish you the best of luck in retirement in March. It's been a pleasure working with you, and certainly going to miss seeing you and working with you, but again, wish you the best of luck. And lastly, before I introduce our panelists, I want to thank our good friend at the association, Jim Jacob at Prime Point, who is the sponsor of this event. So Jim, thank you for your continued support and friendship, and we're going to turn it over for you for 60 seconds. So Jim, the floor is yours.
All right, start the clock, John. So yeah, thank you. And again, Prime Point is honored to be a sponsor of this event and honored to be a great partner of NJAC. We just appreciate the leadership and the team at NJAC and all that you do. So thank you so much. For those of you that don't know us, Prime Point is a payroll service provider. We have been in this business for over 40 years. We serve 150 New Jersey municipalities, so coming up on 25%, or actually closer to 30% of the all the municipalities in the state, as well as 5 counties in the state. We have the honor of serving Union and Sussex County, Essex County, Mercer, and our newest county client is the County of Morris. So we're honored to serve our county friends. We're honored to be located in New Jersey and serve the municipalities in the state, and we just appreciate the relationships that we have. One of the biggest reasons why clients choose us is because of the experience they have. We've actually labeled it and marketed it because it's real, and it's called the Prime Point Experience. Angela, would you run that video?
Payroll processing, time and attendance. HR systems and a different approach to customer service creates what we call the Prime Point Experience. From your first interactions with Prime Point, you'll notice the difference. And once you become a customer, you'll experience the difference. Painless transition to our service. Hold time that averages 7 seconds. You'll never be treated like a number. Get quick and accurate responses to calls and emails from live US-based customer support. Check it out at primepoint.com.
Thank you, Angela. And John, it's back to you, buddy.
Great, thank you, Jim. That was a good video. You said it was 30 seconds, and you weren't kidding, man. I appreciate it. And also just want to take a minute to recognize, although she can't see us, NJAC's president, Terry O'Connor. I believe this is, I think, her first real NJAC event as president and the first county administrator to serve in that role. So Terry, thank you for being here today. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce again just a terrific panel. We're going to start with first. Can I call you Dr. Nicholas Procopio? And I said it wrong, Procopio. There we go. I'm sorry about that. I knew I would get it wrong. But thank you, sir, for being here. He is the Chief of the Bureau of Environmental Assessment. We have Nick Angarone, who is the Chief Resiliency Officer, again for NJDEP. Christine Schell, who is a manager for the Office of Environmental Public Health and Safety, and Helaine Barr, who is the Bureau Chief for Climate Change and Clean Energy. So with that, Dr. Procopio, we're going to turn it over to you. And thank you again.
Yeah. So thanks for the introduction. All right. So yeah, we are all at DEP are thankful and grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. So I'm going to jump in and start off with a little bit of the background, if you will, to climate science. Give us a few minutes of what it is, what the science, what the background is that brings us to the need, the efforts of the other speakers this morning. So so thanks again for these few minutes. I'm happy to have the opportunity to review the facts associated with the changing climate. And so what we'll do is mainly focus on science and expected changes in New Jersey. And so the DEP has issued the state's first ever scientific report on climate change, which brings the global issues right to our own backyard. It was released in June of 2020 as directed by Governor Murphy's Executive Order 89. And so this first version of the scientific report covers the topics that you see on the screen there, and with a primary focus on New Jersey where it's possible. So we'll be amending the report every couple of years. So keep your eyes open, and this gives us the opportunity to touch on additional topics as needed. And so since this release, we're nearing completion of an addendum that will cover human health and community impacts associated with climate change. And we're also preparing a report on the expected economic issues associated with climate change. So definitely more to come and updates as appropriate. So jumping right in, right? The first and perhaps, maybe not singular thing that people think of or are drawn to with when the idea of climate change comes up is or could be temperature, maybe the other is sea level rise, which we'll talk about too. But so what I want to do here is just point out how temperature has been changing specifically in New Jersey. And so we can think of temperature changes in a global sense, or we could, fortunate enough in New Jersey to be able to look at about 125 plus years worth of data that helps us give us a long-term trend to speak to temperature change and climate issues right in our own backyard. So globally, you'll see reported about a 1.5 to 2 degree warming globally. In New Jersey, though, we can look back at this 125 years of temperature data, and we can point to about a 3.5 degree warming over that same period that global average is based on. So we're seeing that New Jersey is warming faster, say, than the global average. And there are reasons for that. And so the dots that you're seeing on that graph represent 125 years worth of average annual temperature. And we look at that long-term trend. It's statistically significant. It's increasing, and we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. And there's strong reason to expect that temperature, that rate of increase, to hold for the next few decades, and towards the end of the century. The previous slide there was looking at average annual temperature. What's interesting now is if we break down the temperature change that we've seen over the last 125 years by season. And what's significant is that when we break it down by season, we clearly see that our winters have increased the most statewide among these different climate regions. So we'll see statewide annual average. There's that 3.5 degrees that I just was pointing to on the previous slide. But look at our winters. our winters have increased again over that 1895 to 2019 time period, 125 years. Our winters have increased by about 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the beginning of this record. Our springs, our summer, our fall, they're about, hanging around the same, about 3-degree warming. But statewide, winters are really warming up. And maybe we know that, just by observation, we don't get those snowy winters that we, had in the past. Maybe when we were kids, we remember a handful of snow days now, but, there's a snow day once, twice, a season, and they're small snowfalls these days. And that's definitely because of this seasonal warming trend that we have. All right. So what I'll try and do throughout these, for these next few minutes is talk about what we've seen in the past and where we're going. And so what this slide here is trying to show us is that as we project temperatures towards the end of the century, we're looking at maybe by the middle of the century, 2050, about a 1 to 6 degree warming by 2050. And it's a broad range, but there's a lot of variability that's associated. And then by the end of the century, depending on what type of emission scenario we're locked into by the end, anywhere from a 3 to 9 degree or a 6 to 13 degree warming. Either way, we can say it's going to be somewhere in between that 3 to 13 degree warming by the end of the century. And that's significant. And that's, that's on top of the warming that we've already seen. Another significant impact that we should be ready for and aware of is changes in precipitation. So as temperatures rise, we'll also see a change in the precipitation patterns from what we're used to. It's shown that for every 1 degree centigrade or about 1.8 degree Fahrenheit increase in the air temperature, the atmospheric temperature, the atmosphere, just the physics of the atmosphere, allow it to hold about 7% more moisture. So more moisture in the atmosphere provides the means provides the means for storms to be more intense and increases the chances of extreme rainfalls. So by 2050, we expect average precipitation to increase 5 to 10%. So over just the last decade, we've already seen changes around 8% increase, and that's average annual precipitation. So we typically get about 45 to 48 inches of rain in a total year. This is suggesting that over the next 30 years, we could see that increase by 5 or 10%. That's significant when we compare it to extreme precipitation, which would be, we'll talk about in the next slide, much different and larger impacts than just average annual precipitation. So as rainfalls become more intense, there will be longer periods of dry spells as well. So these dry periods may not technically be what we define as droughts, but they'll impact our communities, crops, our ecosystems in very similar ways to what we might define as straight droughts. So these dry periods will also be more severely felt because they're going to occur at times where we have extreme higher temperatures, so warmer and drier in between these significant rain events. And so to talk briefly about increased heavy rains, the department just recently completed 2 studies that focused on being able to project into the future how our severe storms might change. And those severe storms that I'm trying to describe are what we think of as the 100-year storms, the 100-year 24-hour storms, how much rain will fall in a 24-hour period in some of these heavier rains. So these recent studies that I just mentioned, conducted by colleagues from NOAA and their Northeast Regional Climate Center. So in them, they project that under a moderate emission scenario, that's a moderate emission scenario is about the path that we're currently on. Our 100-year 24-hour storm is expected to increase on average by about 22% by the end of the century, and about 15% by mid-century, meaning storms will drop larger amounts of rain over shorter periods of time. And so some of you may already feel like you're experiencing this. Just think of our summer, the July rains, Henri and Ida storms that came through. They're typically what we would associate with a 100-year storm, a 1% storm. And we saw 3 of those significant events in a single year. So what we have historically defined as severe or intense rains are happening more and more frequently, and we have to be ready to address those, the issues and problems that come along with that. All right, and so perhaps most directly that would be stormwater, and stormwater recharge is a challenging endeavor, right? When we think about how much infrastructure is already in place and how it would need to be changed and upgraded into the future to be able to handle and maintain these increased storms. Another significant phenomenon associated with climate change, if not temperature that we think about first, perhaps it's sea level rise. And sea level rise gets a lot of attention as a coastal state here in New Jersey, as it should, for good reason. So risk to flooding is not just our beaches, but also our back bay areas and our fluvial areas, the areas along our rivers, wetlands, bayshore communities along the Delaware Bay, not just beachfront areas we have to think about. So what we see here is a range of sea level rise possibilities. And this again is a moderate emissions scenario, again, on the track that we seemingly are on now. And we can see the same data here. I'm sorry, in this table here, we can see it now in tabular form. This is the same data that's presented in the graph behind here, but we can see the same data with the red boxes representing the likely range of sea level rise by 2030, 2050, and then by the end of the century as well. And then the yellow boxes, the sort of, if you will, the average or median projection, or what the scientists believe is just as likely as not to happen. So by mid-century, by 2050, we can expect about 1.4 feet of sea level rise. By 2100, on average, about 3.5 feet of sea level rise. And so when you take that sea level rise, sure, it's along our coasts, so along our fluvial or riverine areas. The question then becomes, how does it impact communities? And so we think of the term sunny day flooding, or flooding that can be expected during high tides outside of any significant precipitation events. So take these intense rainfalls away, and what's the impact along our coastal communities under these sort of normal day dry conditions, just with the input of higher seas. And so what we're looking at here is that, look in that red box, and it highlights the expected number of high tide floods out to the end of the century. And so we're looking at maybe 2020, we're looking at 17 days per year. This is, again, I'm sorry, focused on Atlantic City, but about 17 days per year is what we're seeing in sunny day flooding. But as we move out through the end of the mid-century, the end of the century, we're looking at flooding about every third day or so. Every 3 days, we'd have some type of sunny day flooding, back day flooding. So with sea level rise, becomes an increased threat to our communities. And so there are many other findings, including in the scientific report, related to specific species or ecosystems, but unfortunately don't have as much time to go through all of those. So what I would encourage you to do is go to the department's climate change website. You can find this full report. You can always reach out to me. My contact information is on this slide here. And we can talk more about the impacts of climate change and the different factors that might be affected. But I would, again, draw your attention to increases in temperature, increases in precipitation, both annual and those intense storms, and sea level rise. They're probably some of the most discussed topics and areas that we need to be able to mobilize and quickly address. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to it's either Nick or Christine, but I'm going to stop sharing and let somebody else take it.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Nick Angarone. I'm New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer. I also have the pleasure of managing DEP's Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning. We administer New Jersey's Coastal Management Program. I am also the department's representative to the State Planning Commission. And so most of the the background and where I'm coming from this perspective is from a broader planning perspective, and how we're going to address the impacts that Nick has just walked us through. Go ahead, Becky. So, as Nick mentioned, much of what we're going to or what I'm going to discuss today was set in motion when Governor Murphy signed Executive Order 89 back in October of 2019. That EO did a number of things, not the least of which was establishing the position of Chief Resilience Officer, but also the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience, which is made up of now over 20 state agencies and departments. It also directed the Chief Resilience Officer to develop and issue the scientific report on climate change that Nick mentioned, and as well as work with the Interagency Council to develop a statewide climate change resilience strategy and coastal resilience plan. And so that plan is really intended to guide executive agency action on resilience. And I'll touch on that in a moment. While much of the focus on the executive order, right, is on those individual deliverables, I think what's often overlooked and what is most important, in my opinion, is that the governor made it clear for the first time that it is state policy for state and executive branch agencies to take action and address the impacts of climate change. That's not something that we had in writing or with such a strong directive previously. Go ahead, Becky. All right, so what is the state going to do about those impacts from climate change? So what you see here is the framework of the statewide climate change resilience strategy. The strategy is a policy framework that includes forward-looking state policies that address some of our vulnerabilities to climate impacts, and it helps us strengthen resilience in New Jersey. The strategy is meant to provide recommendations for how state agencies can change to enhance resilience, not necessarily to be prescriptive as to how specific rules should change or what they should say. Per Executive Order 89, the strategy contains recommendations for how state government can change its policies, regulations, funding decisions, and our operations to enhance resilience. The strategy will be reviewed every 2 years. And so this first iteration that was finalized this past October won't be the last. It cannot have all of the answers. And so, over the next year or two, we'll start working on implementation of the strategy. I will note specifically that not shown on this slide, but there is a focus on climate justice throughout the strategy. Our overburdened and socially vulnerable communities feel the impacts of climate change first and more strongly than those of us who are more privileged. And research shows that their recovery from climate hazards is often slower. And so strategies and actions to support those communities can be found in each of the priority areas. I'm not going to go through the priority areas. There are 6 of them that make up the strategy, but each priority area recommends specific strategies and actions that state agencies can take to achieve our resilience goals. And so again, much like the scientific report, I encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't already, to understand kind of the state's vision for how we move resilience forward in New Jersey. Go ahead, Becky. Right, and so we recognize that while state action is important, many of the decisions about how we respond to these climate impacts is going to happen right at our local level. And so we have been implementing a number of policies and programs to provide assistance to municipal governments to do just that. And the Resilient NJ program, particularly the regional resilience projects associated with Resilient NJ, are kind of our core and largest aspect of the program. It currently includes 4 multi-municipal regions that are focused on assessing their risk to flooding. The projects are focused primarily on coastal and inland flooding, and through robust public engagement, each region will ultimately develop a regional resilience action plan that includes a suite of options for those local governments to reduce risk. I will note here that there are 24 municipalities participating across 5 counties. Each of the counties are also participating in each of the projects. We've had really great representation. We've had really great engagement, and we're happy with the way these projects are going. What's being developed, what will be included in those action plans is a range of actions and projects, right? Ranging from outreach and education to further planning and analysis, adoption of ordinances, green and gray infrastructure, right? All the way ranging up to potentially larger infrastructure projects. And then there is a second phase of the program that does provide funding to actually implement some of the planning recommendations that are included in those action plans. So it's our hope that projects such as this not only put needed resources in the hands of our vulnerable communities, but also increase public and understanding of the threats posed by climate change. Go ahead, Becky. Right, so those regional projects are funded by a HUD award, and right, there's not enough resources currently in place to allow us to provide that level of funding to do regional projects across the state. And so we also recognize that many of our local governments don't have staff on payroll with the capacity or experience to undertake detailed planning analyses on their own. And so to help increase the capacity of those governments, we've released the Local Planning for Climate Change Toolkit that was released in June of this past year. So this is an online toolkit based on a logical planning process that includes guidance and associated resources to help municipalities undertake their own planning efforts. We'll continue to work to improve this resource and build out the data and information and guidance so that it can be the go-to tool for our local governments as they undergo a resilience planning process. Go ahead, Becky. Right, so again, we have the broader regional planning projects. We have that toolkit to help local governments, but we also want to try to provide some financial assistance and start help communities go through this process. And so really to fill that gap, we've created the Resilient NJ Municipal Assistance Program that will provide direct resilience planning assistance to communities. So what I'll make clear here is this is not a local grant program. We have procured experienced qualified consulting teams that will get this award and then go directly to the local governments and provide them that assistance, right? There's no grant management. There's no application process for the local governments here. We're trying to take as much off their plate as possible. We want them to be engaged to direct the vision of the consultant that's coming in to provide them the assistance. So this inaugural funding round utilized the $400,000 from our annual Coastal Zone Management Award from NOAA. And so, we issued the request for quotes to those pre-approved consultants. They identified local governments to work with, and we've ultimately identified awards to work in these 5 municipalities that you see on screen here. So we received, though, with very little marketing on our communication on our part, we received totals of over $1 million worth of requests. And so we know that there is additional need out there, and we'll be working to develop those resources and further provide assistance. Go ahead, Becky. So I'll just, before handing off to Christine, I'll just note that I look forward to answering any of your questions. Really interested in hearing kind of the needs of you at the county level and how the state can help. But at this point, I'll turn it over to Kristen. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. So I am the manager of the DEP's Office of Public Health and Safety, which is a very small group that aligns with our partners at the Department of Health to utilize CDC grant money in a way that we can create tools and resources for towns and communities to better understand health risks, especially those related to environmental issues in New Jersey. And obviously climate is a large environmental issue that is confronting all of New Jersey. Next slide, Becky. So climate and human health, I don't know if you noticed in Nick's slide from his climate resilience tool, but then the number one thing pointed out on that was resilient buildings and infrastructure and healthy communities. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But just as some background on climate and human health, we look at human health risks from a changing climate in two ways. As a threat multiplier, climate change will exacerbate existing health concerns. So as the heat rises, we will get more heat stroke, heat health related issues. And our summertime heat band will expand to the months outside of our summer, making more people exposed. Our air quality will likely get worse. New Jersey continues to have to not meet the national ambient air quality for ozone, and that is the summertime air pollutant that is created in the presence of heat and sunlight. So we fully expect that that is a problem that we're going to experience more as the world warms. We also expect things like food insecurities to get worse, particularly in our inner cities. In addition to being a threat multiplier for things that we're already seeing, we expect new climate enhanced health concerns. So in the aftermath of extreme events, there's exposure to mold and other contaminants that are in our floodwaters. We could see water insecurity issues because of that, because of contamination to our water sources. Because we're a coastal state, we might also see salination of our drinking water, which will cause water insecurities. We think we will start to see new insect-borne and infectious disease illnesses. And one issue that has come up numerously over time is a growing mental health issue with relationship to climate change and the expectations of a changing world, and how that is basically just, well, heck, stressing us all out, basically. In addition to all of what I just said, there are both direct and indirect risks. So an indirect risk can also come from some of the changes that we're making because of climate change. So one that's interestingly come up with our Department of Health partners recently is that we've seen an uptick in generator use because of the number of storms that have knocked out our power. And with that, we've seen an increasing number of carbon monoxide poisoning in the state of New Jersey. So that is what we mean by an indirect health effect. And we've seen throughout the country that compounding extremes can overwhelm our emergency and health systems. So wildfires coupled with large storms just max our capacity to cope with climate change. Next slide, Kate. Becky, sorry. And as Nick pointed out, health resiliency and health equity are very closely tied together. We already have overburdened communities in New Jersey. The map you see there is the overburdened communities in New Jersey as identified by the nation's first environmental justice law here in New Jersey. Those communities are already stressed, and as Nick pointed out, they will feel the effects of climate change more acutely and are less prepared to recover. They have higher levels of impervious cover. A lot of them are water adjacent, and they have fewer emergency and health resources to be able to respond back. Next slide. So as I pointed out, the New Jersey Climate Resiliency Strategy Priority 1 is to build resilient and healthy communities. I highlighted healthy communities because I'm going to show you how much that comes up in a lot of the work that the state of New Jersey is currently doing. But that first priority wants us to integrate public health into community resilience planning and activities. And what it means by that is, how do we enhance capacity mostly at the local level, and how do we expand monitoring, assessment, and planning tools for public health that can help decision makers decide how they're going to protect their communities. A little sneak peek of work that we're doing here at the department that we expect to release in the first half of this year is a planning tool for communities called Healthy Community Planning NJ. Sorry, they just changed the name on me and I'm trying to get used to it. Which will provide each individual municipality in New Jersey with specific indicators for their town, and how those indicators, both health and environmental indicators, compared to the county they're in the state. While that was developed outside of the climate arena, it does have some information that will help with climate planning, such as heat illness and flooding. And we hope to expand that to include more climate indicators as we move forward. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk about some other broader state issues that are going on that are threaded to the climate resiliency work and the department is tied into. Right now, there's a large-scale Healthy New Jersey 2030 effort happening in the state, where internal and external partners are focused on developing topic areas, objectives, and healths. Overarching on all of their topic areas are themes of resilience, policy, and equity. And you'll note there's that term again, healthy communities is an action team for them. And the goals for that include how to have equitable access to resources and conditions that support optimal health and well-being, and establish an inclusive and just health system. The point to be made here is that we're starting to talk about healthy communities as something that's broader than anything that we've looked at in the past from a state level. It includes scoping things that are traditionally outside of the health concepts that we're used to talking about. So we're talking about things like safety within your community, in addition to being able to have access to healthcare and have clean and renewable energy sources. So that broader term, kind of, as Nick pointed out, pulls together all the state resources to try to focus these efforts together. This Healthy New Jersey 2030 effort will be the building block for the state's next health assessment and its health improvement plan. And then that, of course, trickles down to county improvement plans. So it's a huge effort that involves many of the people that are on this call today. Next slide. The New Jersey Climate Change Alliance is an effort that has been in existence probably for 15 years now. They also are focusing on statewide efforts to put together climate change strategies at the state and local levels in New Jersey. And they have a public health work group as well, which is focused on community health needs assessments and how to link this issue to the larger initiatives that we're talking about. So again, another piece of information, another source that is looking at how best to determine what indicators communities need in order to make the best decisions for public health in the face of a changing climate. Next slide. At a national level, the federal government is currently working on its national climate assessment, the 5th version of that. This is a federal evaluation of the science and the knowledge. So a little bit of what Nick P talked about at a federal level. It's expected to be released in the fall of 2023, but we are actively working with the federal government and inputting into this. It will have a human health chapter. And as you'll note, the 3 topics for them are health impacts from extreme events, water and food security and infectious disease, and community health and environmental justice. So again, there's that term community health. What does that mean? And how do we ensure that we're providing that to our communities and getting them the resources they need to get to that point? Next slide. Finally, Sustainable Jersey, which most of you are probably aware is a voluntary effort in New Jersey that helps towns get recognition for environmental and public health initiatives to be more sustainable. Last year released their health gold, which identifies specific municipal actions and performance levels that would demonstrate that they're incorporating health into their decision making and addressing their social and environmental conditions that are impacting, again, the health of their communities. So we hope very much that Healthy Community Planning NJ will be a resource to this effort once we release it here in the state of New Jersey. And we do look forward to utilizing that tool as a mechanism for helping communities plan broadly through a health lens. And I think that's it. That's my last slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Helaine, who's going to tell you how we're fixing the other half of the problem.
Thank you, Christine. So good morning. My name is Helaine Barr, and I am the Bureau Chief of Climate Change and Clean Energy Bureau here at the DEP. And our work really focuses on reducing the state's greenhouse gas emissions so that we don't have all of these impacts, hopefully. So anyway, yeah, so we really are helping to lead the climate mitigation planning, policy, and implementation. But I would like to note that, this is not something that one small bureau at the DEP can do alone. It's really an effort that's occurring across state agencies, across programs within the DEP. And we really need the local and regional organizations to also take up this work as well. Reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is not something that, one person or one organization can do. Next slide, please. So New Jersey has no less than 3 greenhouse gas reduction goals for the state. The Global Warming Response Act, which was originally passed in 2007 and then amended in 2019, calls for the state to reduce its greenhouse gas emission levels to be at or below the 1990 levels by 2020. And based on our most recent greenhouse gas assessments, the state has achieved that first goal about 11 years early. So that is a great win for the state and shows that these reductions can be achieved. This occurred primarily because of our shift away from coal-fired power plants to cleaner burning natural gas combined cycle plants. The Global Warming Response Act also requires the state to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to at least an 80% levels below 2006 by 2050. And this is the little black dot on the bottom right of the chart that you see. And you can see that this is going to be a much more difficult goal to reach, right, compared to what our levels are today. So it's going to require really a much broader effort. And then more recently, just a few months ago, Governor Murphy signed Executive Order 274, which established an interim target between these 2 goals of reducing our emissions to 50% of 2006 levels by 2030. So again, this, I think, really makes things a bit more concrete for all of us implementers, right? In the next 8 years, we're going to need to reduce our emissions by about 40 million metric tons. So we're not talking something time 30 years in the future. We're talking in the next 8 years. Next slide, please. So we can't fix what we don't measure. So one of the most important things that my office does is we create the annual greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And we found that the three biggest sources in the state are transportation, the building sector, and electric generation. And they count for about over 80% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And to date, they have largely been the focus of state efforts. And we really encourage counties to start decarbonizing here as well. The transportation sector consists of activities that move people and goods from one location to another. So these are things like the cars and trucks that we drive, and other non-road modes of transportation like trains, subways, cargo ships, etc. And it remains the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in New Jersey, which is probably no surprise to any planner sitting in the audience. The second largest sector I'm going to loosely refer to as the building sector, and this includes our residential, single, and multifamily housing units, as well as our commercial service providing facilities, institutional living quarters, colleges, etc. These all have emissions associated with space heating, water heating, other appliances like cooking, etc. And then our third largest source of emissions in the state is our electric generation. And this includes all of our dedicated in-state electric generation, the energy from our in-state resource recovery facilities, and emissions from electricity imports as well. Next slide, please. So achieving these greenhouse gas reduction goals is really going to require a transformation in the way that we generate and consume energy, right? Each one of us as individuals will need to make a commitment to do things differently to reduce our carbon footprints. The state has put out a series of reports that really identify the strategies and pathways to achieving our greenhouse gas reduction goals. The Energy Master Plan was put out by the Board of Public Utilities and provides some really high-level strategies to get there. And the DEP back in 2020 put out its Global Warming Response Act 80 by 50 report, which provides really detailed recommendations and charts out the different emission pathways as well. Ultimately, these two reports complement each other, and they found that there are three critical ways that we're really going to have to take some bold action today. And that first one is replacing all of our fossil fueled vehicles with electric vehicles. The second thing is converting our space and water heating in the residential and commercial building sectors to electric heat. And the third is replacing the fossil fuels in our electric power generation sector with renewable energy sources. But I do want to stress that simultaneous development of renewable electric generation is necessary to avoid a shift in emissions to the electric generation sector. So if we electrify everything, but we don't decarbonize electric generation, we're not going to achieve our greenhouse gas reduction goals. Next slide, please. So what is the state doing on this front? I'm just going to go over those top three sectors. So for vehicle electrification, the state has set some aggressive targets for electric vehicle adoption via law, including a great lead by example initiative of trying to electrify about 25% of the state fleet by 2050. We definitely encourage the counties to consider establishing similar goals for themselves. And I included a few incentive programs here that I thought would be applicable to the counties. We have the Clean Fleet EV incentive program out of the BPU, which provides grants for both the purchase of EVs and chargers. And then the DEP also has a slate of programs that I believe are applicable to counties. It has the Pay to Plug In, which provides grants to offset the cost of purchasing electric vehicle charging stations. And then it also has the medium and heavy duty electrification grants that are funded via our RGGI auction proceeds. And this allows, gives funding for local vehicles such as school buses, et cetera, and covers the cost of, going for an electric vehicle, as well as installing charging infrastructure. Additionally, the state has put out a lot of complementary EV resources. There's a great website called Drive Green where you can find a lot of this information. I wanted to just highlight that there are EVs on the New Jersey state purchasing contract. So that's also something you guys should note. Next slide. Around building decarbonization, this is definitely going to be one of the more technically challenging initiatives for the state. Achieving this goal is going to really be a multi-decade process of eliminating fossil fuel use in the building sector through large-scale electrification. And really, the state is just embarking on this effort. You know, we've to date really focused on improving our energy efficiency. In 2020, the state set some of the highest energy savings targets in the country, requiring electric utilities and natural gas utilities to achieve some of these targets. And the state also has long-standing energy efficiency programs that I wanted to highlight again for the counties. You know, there's the local government energy audit program via BPU and the ESIP program. And I know a lot of the counties have already taken advantage of these, and we would encourage that you continue to do so. And these can really help you identify cost-effective energy efficiency measures and really help to reduce your carbon footprint. In terms of building decarbonization, you know, our modeling for the Energy Master Plan and the 80 by 50 report set some really aggressive targets. And the state is still trying to sort of wrap its head around these. Our initial efforts are really looking at building codes. And so there's the Zero Emission Building Code Collaborative that's being run out of the Board of Public Utilities in partnership with the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership and Rutgers Center for Green Building. And so if you're interested in engaging in this, you know, they're looking for additional stakeholders to help develop, adopt, and implement a building code roadmap for New Jersey. And this roadmap is really going to look at how to best integrate practices and programs to achieve zero energy buildings. Next slide, please. And then lastly, grid decarbonization. As you see, we have some modeling that was done for the Energy Master Plan in the 80 by 50 report that established some very aggressive renewable energy targets by year for this state installed capacity. And I just wanted to highlight the state's really going to need to exponentially grow its in-state solar PV over the next 30 years. And it's taken the first initial steps to do so. We had the Solar Act of 2021, which provided incentives for the development of almost 4 more gigawatts of new solar by 2026, including a special carve out for community solar. And further, the state is leading on offshore wind with its commitment to procure over 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. And BPU's almost awarded half of these already since these goals were established. So we're definitely on the right track here. Some other efforts, DEP is currently updating its solar siting analysis for the state. So this is something that when it's published, I would suggest the counties take a look at and become familiar with. And it really is to help guide solar arrays to be sited in the most preferable locations. The state also has, for its state buildings, a solar PPA that's starting to move forward as well. So we're looking to practice what we preach and also get solar on as many of the state buildings as possible. Next slide, please. So in summary, what can the counties do? I just want to say you can do more of what you already do. You know, you guys are great examples of leading by example. So please continue these efforts, right? From the wind port partnerships in Gloucester and Salem counties, and over the 100 solar projects on landfills, brownfields, county buildings and other structures. You guys have done extensive energy efficiency work. So we ask you to continue to keep doing that great work. You guys are already experts at procuring goods and services for county and previously municipal duties, you know, as diverse as 911 system implementation to solid waste removal. We now encourage you to apply those skills to fleet electrification, clean energy aggregation, providing reforestation guidance. Who knows what you'll come up with, but I know that you'll do a great job at using those skills. Additionally, like I've already said, you know, think about adopting an EV readiness plan, citing EV charging, purchasing EVs, and, you know, in closing, always lobby the state for increased roles and guidance and support and partnership moving forward. It's going to take all of us to really tackle this greenhouse gas problem. So in closing, thank you.
Great, thank you. That was very informative and alarming, you know, quite frankly. Can you share the PowerPoint presentations that we can circulate among our members? That would be terrific. That's the first question that we have.
Yeah, we can do that.
All right, that'd be terrific. Thank you. Let me ask you this question. Since New Jersey is, as you know, a home rule state, has the department, has the administration considered ways to address combating climate, change in a more regional, with a more regional approach, and maybe using county governments to help in that capacity to carry out some of these, important plans?
I mean, I'll speak to that from the resilience perspective, right? Is that first, we're open to working with anyone and everyone, right? As Helaine mentioned, a bureau in DEP can't do this alone. All of state government can't do this alone. It's going to need, all of us in government, as well as, other public and private partners to really address the issue. We started with from the kind of resilience planning perspective, through the Resilient NJ program, right? We opened that up to any local governments, and so we have one of those regional projects is led by Middlesex County. All right, they were the applicant and are leading the Raritan River Bayshore community project, and so that's we certainly believe that looking at this at a regional perspective, from a planning perspective, is really the best the level to look at this, right? Your flooding isn't stopping at your municipal border, right? The heat isn't changing at your municipal boundary, right? Procopio provided a map showing increases in extreme precipitation events, and he showed it at the county level, right? And you see like jumps right from county to county, but we understand that's right. It's not going to be specific to that county. It's going to be a range. So looking at that kind of at the regional scale, whether that be multi-municipal, whether that be county, is something we definitely want to look at. And I think hearing back from the counties, from you all, and how we are best able to do that is something that I'm particularly interested in hearing.
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you. And we'll certainly make sure to keep open, a dialogue with the department, and anything you think that we can do from the association to help, please let us know. We have one more question, and then we're gonna bring on NJAC's President Terry O'Connor to thank everyone for, again, a terrific conversation. But the last question is, one of the hot topics we're seeing in the news is just what seems to be never-ending warehouse sprawl. How does that impact the state's resiliency plans, and how are you addressing that? And I hope I'm not putting you on the spot with these questions, but I think that and if I am, sorry.
It's all right. So again, I'll speak from the resilience perspective, right? There's a lot of impacts from warehouses that I think are, we don't necessarily think of right away, but that we're starting to see and hear about more and more, right? And so it's not simply the direct impact of that building, but there's impacts to that impervious cover, right? And there's a good amount of impervious cover with these warehouses. Any amount of additional impervious is going to affect how we deal with stormwater and the impacts of stormwater in that watershed. There's, I don't want to speak for Christine and Helaine, but right, there's impacts to our communities from the truck traffic itself and the kind of the side effects of that truck traffic, right? Whether that be air quality or, mental health issues with 18-wheelers coming down small county roads. It's a huge issue that crosses, from a state perspective, kind of several state agencies. There are conversations ongoing amongst state agencies in how we start to grapple with the issue. From my history and my background in education as a land use planner, right? The most clear and obvious answer is that your zoning determines what can go there. And if your community has determined that that's the type of use you want, right? That's what you're going to zone for. But we also have to recognize that, in the past where we've been zoning for, let's say, to avoid residential and school children. We've done a lot of zoning for this type of use, and now we're starting to see the impacts of that. And so, right, that's the most direct way that we deal with this. What's harder, and coming again, looking at it from the county perspective, is that regional impact, right, and how we look at it from the regional and the state level. So there's, again, lots of conversations about how we start to deal with that perspective, from a watershed approach, from a state planning approach, from an environmental justice approach. And I think it's something that, you'll see that conversation continue. And certainly as we read about this in the news every single day, we'll start to see the state come out with, potentially guidance and recommendations for how we move forward and address the issue.
Great, thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. And just, to underscore what I thought this was an outstanding conversation. No one dropped off the call for the entire hour that we've been on. So that's a pretty good barometer on how engaging and interesting and important the conversation was. So thank you. So Terry, were you able to get on, O'Connor?
Yes, I believe I am.
All right, great.
All right, thank you. I apologize for my earlier technical difficulties. I want to thank all of our panelists. It was very informative. Like John said, it was a little scary, but I think very enlightening. Climate change is clearly impacting all of us, but sometimes I think it's such a large, overwhelming challenge that people sort of ignore it. Like, okay, I can't do anything about it. Little Monmouth County is not going to make an impact on this. But I think that everyone probably should have gotten some very fresh ideas. If all of us do a little bit, we can definitely have an impact. So I want to thank all panelists again. A special thank you to Jim Jacob and Prime Point. And finally, thank you to everyone who was on the call, stayed on the call. And I look forward to seeing all of you on April 13th at our next webinar. And we will post this PowerPoint on our site, John. We'll get it out to everybody. All right, I say yes. So
We'll get it out to everybody.
all right, thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Thanks again for the opportunity, guys.
Great, take care. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.